Right? Is that good? Yeah. How's that? You see? Ladies and gentlemen, party and our live streamers. Hi. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Snape's worst memory. Harry walked the remaining few feet to the pensive and stood over it, gazing into the depths. He hesitated, listening, then pulled out his wand again. The office and the corridor beyond were completely silent. He gave the contents of the pensive a small prod with the end of his wand. The silvery stuff within began to swirl very fast. Harry leaned forward over it and saw that it had become transparent. He was, once again, looking down into the room as though a circular window in the ceiling. In fact, unless he was much mistaken, he was looking down upon the Great Hall. His breath was actually fogging the surface of Snape's thoughts. His brain seemed to be in limbo. It would be insane to do the thing that he was so strongly tempted to do. He was trembling. Snape could be back at any moment, but Harry thought of Cho's anger, of Malfoy's jeering face, and a reckless daring seized him. He took a great gulp of breath and plunged his face into the surface of Snape's thoughts. At once, the floor of the office lurched, tipping Harry headfirst into the pensive. He was falling through the blackness, spinning furiously as he went, and then he was standing in the middle of the great hall. But the four house tables were gone. Instead, there were more than 100 smaller tables, all facing the same way, at each of which a student, head bent low, scribbling on a roll of parchment. The only sound was the scratching of quills and the occasional rustle as somebody adjusted their parchment. It was clearly exam time. Sunshine was streaming through the high windows onto the bent heads, which shone chestnut and some copper gold in bright light. Harry looked around carefully. Snape had to be here somewhere. This was his memory. And there he was, at a table right behind Harry. Harry stared. Snape, the teenager, had a stingy, pallid look about him, like a plant kept in the dark. His hair was lank and greasy and was flopping onto the table. His hooked nose barely half an inch from the surface parchment as he scribbled.
Oh, they are right. I am too pretty for this role.
Harry moved around behind Snape and read the heading of the exclamation paper. Defense against the dark arts, ordinary wizarding level. So Snape had to be 15 or 16, around Harry's age. His hand was flying across the parchment. He had written at least a foot more than his closest neighbors, and yet his writing was minuscule and cramped. 5 more minutes! The voice made Harry jump. Turning, he saw the top of Professor Flitwick's head moving between the decks a short distance away. Professor Flitwick was walking past a boy with untidy black hair. Very untidy black hair. Yeah, shoot.
Muscle it up a little bit.
Yeah, I can fix it.
There you go.
Untidy.
Got some
Untidy.
That's good. There you go. Harry moved so quickly that had he been solid, he would have knocked desks flying. Instead, he seemed to slide, dreamlike, across the 2 aisles and up a third. The back of the black-haired boy's head drew nearer and nearer. He was straightening up now, putting down his quill, pulling his roll of parchment toward him as to reread what he had written. Harry stopped in front of the desk and gazed down at his 15-year-old father. Excitement exploded in the pit of his stomach. It was as though he was looking at himself, but with deliberate mistakes. James's eyes were hazel. His nose was slightly longer than Harry's, and there was no scar on his forehead. But they had the same thin face, same mouth, same eyebrows. James's hair stuck up at the back exactly as Harry's did. His hands could have been Harry's, and Harry could tell that when James stood up, they would be within an inch of each other's heights. James yawned hugely and rumpled up his hair, making it even messier than it had been. Then with a glance toward Professor Flitwick, he turned in his seat and grinned at a boy sitting 4 seats behind him. Something is obviously more entertaining than us.
So that boy happens to make girls giggle.
Oh, no.
With another shock of excitement, Harry saw Sirius give James the thumbs up. Sirius was lounging in his chair at his ease, tilting it back on 2 legs. He was very good-looking. His dark hair fell into his eyes with a sort of casual elegance neither James nor Harry could ever have achieved. I'm not pretty enough for this role. And a girl sitting behind him was eyeing him hopefully. though he didn't seem to have noticed. And 2 seats along from this girl, Harry's stomach gave another pleasurable squirm.
Pleasurable squirm.
It was Remus Lupin.
Inducing another pleasurable squirt.
He looked rather pale and peaky. Was the full moon approaching? And was absorbed in the exam. As he reread his answers, he scratched his chin with the end of his quill, frowning slightly. So that meant Wormtail had to be around here elsewhere too. And sure enough, Harry spotted him within seconds. A small, mousy-haired boy with a pointed nose.
Perfect cast.
Nailed it. Wormtail looked anxious. He was chewing his fingernails, staring down at his paper, scuffing the ground with his toes. Every now and then he glanced hopefully at his neighbor's paper. Harry stared at Wormtail for a moment, then back at James, who was now doodling on a bit of scrap parchment. He had drawn a snitch and was now tracing the letters L-E. What did they stand for?
Whoa. The mystery.
Close down, please, squeaked Professor Flitwick. That means you too, Stebbins. Please remain seated while I collect your parchment. Accio! More than 100 rolls of parchment zoomed into the air and into Professor Flitwick's outstretched arms, knocking him backward off his feet. Several people laughed. A couple of students at the front of the desk got up, took hold of Professor Flitwick beneath the elbows, and lifted him onto his feet again. Thank you, panted Professor Flitwick. Very well, everybody, you're free to go. Harry looked down at his father, who had hastily crossed out L-E, the L-E he had been embellishing, jumped to his feet, stuffed his quill and the exam question paper into his bag, which he slung over his back and stood waiting for Sirius to join him. Harry looked around and glimpsed Snape a short way away, moving between the tables toward the doors into the entrance hall, still absorbed in his own examination paper. Round-shouldered yet angular, he walked in a twitchy manner that recalled a spider, his oily hair swinging about his face.
That sounds more like me.
A gang of chattering girls separated Snape from James and Sirius, and by planting himself in the midst of this group, Harry managed to keep Snape in sight while straining his ears to catch the voices of James and his friends.
Did you like the question 10, Mooney?
Asked Sirius as they emerged into the entrance hall.
Loved it.
Said Lupin briskly.
Give 5 signs that identify a werewolf. Excellent question.
Do you think they managed to get all the signs?
Said James in a tone of mock concern.
Think I did.
Said Lupin seriously as they joined the crowd thronging around the front doors, eager to get out into the sunlit grounds.
1. He's sitting on my chair. 2. He's wearing my clothes. 3. His name's Remus Lupin.
Wormtail was the only one who didn't laugh.
We got the